anybody had the Orange winning 10 games on their bingo card for last season, and rightfully so. They were coming off Fran Brown's first season. They had about 7, 8 seasons under Dino Babers, who I think is a really strong offensive mind, somebody who recruited at a solid level and was able to bring in a pretty good amount of talent too. However, it just seems like any time that they finally got some momentum, they could really never get to where they want to be. I mean, I go back to that 2018 season when they went 10-3 and everything was kind of coming together, especially in those kind of rebuild seasons from 2016 to 2017. And then in 2022 and 2023 kind of seemed like the year where we would actually see Syracuse kind of make that jump from just peripheral middle of the pack team to, hey, maybe they can finally make some noise in the ACC. And it just simply never really came together. And you insert Fran Brown, who has a incredibly rich history of recruiting in the Northeast, just a really strong personality, and somebody that I think a lot of people can relate to. For those of you who are, really passionate about college football just as much as I am, I recommend checking out his interview with Adam Branneman. And he sits down with him, has a one-on-one. They talk for about 50 minutes, and they discuss his backstory in Camden, New Jersey, which is about 10 minutes from where I grew up. He talks about some of the struggles and the adversity that he faces, and also just his general mindset in terms of how he puts a program together, what kind of coaching staff he decided to bring in. And it was really telling in terms of how he kind of foresees this program going too, because I think Syracuse has a ton of potential too. And, I even go back and I think of some of the greats of Syracuse football dating back to the late 80s or even early 90s. I go back and think of Donovan McNabb. I think of Don McPherson. I think of Ernie Davis, Marvin Harrison, Jim Brown, all these phenomenal players that are such important parts of Syracuse's football history. And it's really just a shame that they've never really been able to kind of piece it together to really be more than just a part of the conference, a team that I think with a couple little tweaks and a couple more things that go their way, I think they can be a team that kind of gets to the next echelon of college football. But for now, they're kind of in the middle of just being middle of the road, even though they're a 10-win team as of now. But, at least historically speaking, one of the only ACC schools that haven't played in the conference championship, and also to 76 and 85 since joining the ACC. So just, Syracuse is one of those teams where I think they have historically been patient with their coaches too. I mean, I think of Paul Pasqualoni. He was there for about 14 seasons. They probably should have never got rid of him in hindsight. Dino Babers also had a solid run there from 2016 to 2023, especially when I go back and think of that 2018 season when they won 10 games, et cetera, too. And even last year, I mean, the offensive attack was just so much fun to watch. And I'm saying that as someone who primarily likes more of a defensive team anyway. But they were the nation's strongest passing attack last season, averaging 370 yards per game and averaging 34 points and 468 yards a game too. And I think what Syracuse really did a great job with, aside from really maximizing Kyle McCord and being able to prove that hey, they can compete in the ACC with the right explosive talent, they also were just able to put up points on the board and really control the tempo of the game. Out of all the FBS teams in the country, they were number 6 in the nation in terms of controlling tempo and being able to put that together. However, going into the 2025 season, they have a number of question marks, at least offensively, because I think at least year one going into Fran Brown's first season, they relied primarily on the transfer portal, and probably rightfully so. I mean, I think Syracuse was going to be a tough kind of place to be to begin with, just given just how much more competitive the ACC is. I don't think a lot of people necessarily knew what Fran Brown was going to do, but you got to give him a lot of credit for what he's done so far. I mean, to have a 10-win season for the type of talent that they have, and also too for the what they've done this season in terms of recruiting. Now, granted, they've taken a slight hit in terms of the recruiting front. They're ranked 50th right now in 2025 compared to 37th in 2024. However, what I think they should be excited about is the fact that they have 35 total commits, which is the most in FBS. And it's very obvious too, even just hearing from that interview with Fran Brown and just kind of just hearing about his passions, hearing about his struggles and his adversities. I think that's something that Syracuse is really going to be focusing on for years to come too, especially when he even spoke about, hey, when he was talking about putting this staff together, the first person he talked about was Elijah Robinson, who was Texas A&M's defensive coordinator under Mike Elko, and he really spoke highly of him too. And especially when you saw the success that Texas A&M had and being able to translate that into Syracuse, I think there's definitely a lot of potential there. Now, granted, it's definitely a work in progress. I mean, they don't quite have the talent there, and I think they did face a lot of struggles last season, primarily because a lot of those guys were on the younger side. And just generally speaking, a lot of new faces, just like there's going to be this year too, between the transfer portal and people graduating. But at the same time too, even though it might not be, at least statistically speaking, as high as you might want, they do have a lot of strong guys that I really think are going to be really key playmakers. I look at John Tay Cook II coming in from Washington, just a guy who I believe is going to be a number one receiver for this team. He's well-rounded, he's savvy, he can get open in tight spaces, and he can break tackles and really be a guy who can make some big explosive plays for the Syracuse team that's really going to need it too. And also, I'll give even a shout out to Chris Peel and also Ricky Collins, sophomore quarterback coming in from LSU, who I think is going to be competing with Steve and Gelly, who spent his last 2 years at Notre Dame as a backup. He was about 73% completion percentage, a little over 700 yards with about 10 touchdowns too. So that whole battle is going to be fascinating to see too. And I think as of this recording, I don't think they've announced yet who's going to be the starter, but I'm sure somebody in the comments who follows Syracuse football a little bit more passionately can probably tell me where they decide to go. But nevertheless, I mean, when you look at this Orange team, they definitely have some legitimate talent. I mean, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I talked about that a little bit a couple seconds ago, but a couple guys that I think that you should be really excited about. I think of Deuce Chestnut. He's going to be a senior strong safety, just a guy who's a ball hawk all over the field and somebody who's going to be a really strong asset for him. I think of David Reese and Darren McDonald, two defensive end linebackers who I think are going to make an immediate impact and somebody who is going to more or less be the leader of this defense. And also, too, I mean, I think Darryl Gill is going to be a huge asset for this receiving core, too, especially as they face a lot of question marks this season, especially, it was definitely a little bit more senior heavy compared to some of the teams of the past. For example, I think the wide receiver rooms is going to be, aside from John Tay Cook, who I think is going to be fine. Outside of that, I think there's going to be a lot of guys who I just think are going to have to step up in big pivotal spots, and they might not necessarily have had the playing time or just the kind of the spotlight that they're going to need or have. So I'm definitely kind of intrigued to kind of see where that goes too. And especially too, Syracuse was not the most disciplined team last season. They had 92 penalties for just under 800 yards last season. So they're definitely going to have to clean that up if they are going to be contenders again in the ACC too, because granted, they won a lot of close games last season, and also they played a relatively soft schedule. So I'm a little bit concerned about, hey, how does that kind of translate into next season too? Because the good news is I still think they're going to have a strong passing attack. I don't think the offensive line is going to be as much of an issue as people are making it sound. I'm more concerned about how these wide receivers really kind of come together, and most importantly, who ends up starting at quarterback too. Because I think Ricky Collins and Steve Engel kind of have a similar skill set. I think Ricky Collins is probably a little bit more athletic than Steve Engeli, but I think Engeli right now is probably the better overall passer. Either way, for a quarterback, one of the most exciting offenses to be a part of in all of college football. So I think either way, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. But nevertheless, before I wrap this up, just a quick little football schedule preview. I mean, they start off the year versus Tennessee in Atlanta, and that to me could be a statement game for them, especially when you have a Tennessee team who I'm going to be previewing later this week is a team with just so many question marks. And I think a lot of people are just going to be kind of fascinated how both these teams stand. So I think that's really going to be telling in terms of where they kind of go for the rest of the season. And even they face a tough UConn team too, who's an independent coming off a 9-win season. And they have a ton of talent and a team that a lot of people don't really talk about. So that could be a struggle going into these first two games here. And also they have a tough road game versus Clemson a couple of weeks later. They also face Duke, SMU, and they go on the road versus Georgia Tech. Syracuse has another tough schedule. I mean, there's not really a lot of guaranteed wins on the schedule. I mean, besides the tune-up game that you have at Colgate and presumably the last game you have of the year versus Boston College. But outside of that, I don't really see many games on here that I absolutely say to myself, okay, they should absolutely win this game. Now, granted, maybe you can put the Pitt game in there, but I think Pitt's going to be better than people think. But at the same time, too, what they got going for them is they have one of the strongest safety rooms in all of college football. They're going to have some question marks at corner. I think you saw that last year, too, with just how many passing yards in general that they gave up. There's going to be some new faces on the defensive front. However, I think what you have to say to yourself, too, is I think they got a lot of rotational guys that I think can kind of step up into those spots, even though you do worry about it a little bit. Fran Brown has put a phenomenal staff together, especially I really trust Elijah Robinson, one of the strongest, most underrated hires of the last cycle last year. Both phenomenal recruiters, can relate to players, and I think you're going to keep on seeing that as this program kind of develops and they instill that culture and they really kind of continue that identity of fast-paced, strong passing attacks and just putting up points and winning football games. So I'm definitely excited to see where Syracuse football goes. But I think there's going to be some question marks, and I think it's going to be a lot more easier said than done for really Syracuse kind of putting that together and being able to kind of put another 10-win season together. I think that's probably needless to say. I think it's going to be a little bit ambitious, but at the same time, too, Syracuse does have a lot of the things, at least right now, in place to really kind of put that together and solidify themselves as a team to be on the watch for